Today, I want to give you one more installment in this series that I've been doing called Losing My Religion. And we have been peeling back the layers on the dead forms of religion that we have often accumulated in order to get back to the real core, the real heart of the message of Christ, the gospel of grace. And what I hope you're discovering through this series is that in losing your religion, you're coming more alive in Jesus than ever before. See, we've been tracking through this series how certain Pharisaical forms of religion have crept in and bled into our practice and our experience of Christianity, at least for many of us, and how far from the true message of Jesus those things are. And so in the process, we are working on losing our need to pretend to be better than we are. We're also losing our need to try harder to somehow measure up and so that eventually God might be pleased with us. And then we are also taking a huge burden off our shoulders by losing our need to judge others and instead to find ourselves free to love them right where they are. Now, there's a final layer of this lifeless religion that I want to pull back and I want to discard it today. And this one might actually be the most widespread of each of these ones that we've talked about in this series. But let's talk about losing our need to play God. That's what I want to talk about today, losing our need to play God. Now, when I talk about playing God, or if you hear that expression, probably your mind goes to a lot of different places. You can think of a lot of ways that humanity tries to play God, and a lot of it, when we think about that, it seems to surround the use of advanced technologies a lot. So we fear people playing God when it comes to things like genetic engineering, for instance. And we think about how human beings are manipulating the human genome and sometimes trying to create designer babies and things like that. We think about various forms of medical technologies that can be used in ways that seem maybe beyond what human beings should be trying to do. And maybe one of those things would be when sometimes life-saving care is withheld because a certain person isn't deemed as worth the cost of saving them. And so we would call that playing God. Or we think about maybe AI, right? AI, the development of artificial intelligence that's now sweeping through our world and every various kind of industry there is, this creation of an artificial intelligence that we fear could maybe become a competing and highly advanced life form. We don't know, but it's a little scary. But I think probably, my guess is that most of us who are here today, and maybe those of you watching online, would probably feel like playing God is not particularly one of your problems, right? I mean, we aren't involved, most of us, at least I'm not aware of any of you that are involved in groundbreaking technologies or governmental or corporate decisions that affect the lives of millions and millions of people. And so we might think, well, this isn't something that is an issue for me. But this desire to play God is actually, I think, far more common than maybe we at first give it credit for. In fact, Luke Finley put it really well in an online essay he wrote. He said, playing God means slowly usurping his authority and role in your life. Now, when you put it that way, you start to see this is a bigger problem maybe than I'm initially thinking of. And there are a number of ways that you might go about doing just that, trying to usurp his role in your life. And we're going to highlight a few of those this morning. Not to mention the fact that playing God is a guarantee, pretty much, of just experiencing a cascade of frustrations, disappointments, and an overall deep unhappiness with the world and with the human beings in the world. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about this need to play God. Now, the Pharisees of Jesus' day, who were very religious people, are put forward in the Gospels as kind of a model of what not to do, a lot. And so I want to take you to John chapter 7 this morning, as we're going to see that the Pharisees, among their many issues, this issue of playing God was one of them. So as we go to John chapter 7, let me give you the background of the chapter, because what had happened, everything that happens in chapter 7 is a result of what happened in chapter 5. And in chapter 5, Jesus had healed a local man who had been lying paralyzed by the same pool for 38 long years. And so he healed this man. He gets up and walks away for the first time in 38 years, and it's this incredible miracle, and it's a wonder of wonders, and people are just dumbstruck. They're amazed about what Jesus has done, but the Pharisees are upset about it. And verse 1 says that after this, Jesus went around in Galilee because the Jewish leaders there in Jerusalem were looking for a way to kill him. Now, the Pharisees were looking for a way to kill Jesus because he's challenging the status quo. He is attracting a lot of followers, and he is threatening their influence and power. If you want to get somebody riled up, just threaten their power. In verse 19 of the chapter, Jesus says to the Pharisees, he says, has not Moses given you the law? Yet not one of you, what? Not one of you keeps the law. Why are you trying to kill me? See, they accused Jesus of breaking the Sabbath because he had healed that man back in chapter 5 on the Sabbath day. And so while they're accusing Jesus of breaking the Sabbath, they don't seem to have any problem with planning to commit murder to protect their own interests, right? And then at the end of the chapter, verse 50 and 51, it says that Nicodemus, who had gone to Jesus earlier, that was back in chapter 3, and who was one of their own number, he was one of the Pharisees, asked, does our law condemn a man without first hearing him to find out what he's been doing? So Nicodemus is one of the exceptions to the rule among the Pharisees, and he's actually trying to defend Jesus. But the Pharisees as a group, they were always telling people, hey, you need to obey the law of God, and yet they felt like the situation justified them breaking it. And so they're going to break the law. They're going to try to execute Jesus with no due process simply because it would suit their purposes. And I think all of that is an example to us. Now, none of us are probably involved in some kind of murder plot of anyone, but think about it this way. I'm playing God when I try to do life on my own terms. And if you kind of take what the Pharisees are doing here in John chapter 7, you can scale it down to really, underneath all of that, that's what they're doing. They're trying to do life on their terms. So if I pick and choose which commands of God I'm willing to follow and which I'm not willing to follow, or if I just choose to disregard the commands of God sometimes whenever they don't seem to suit me, whenever they don't seem to get me what I want or what I think I need, then I'm playing God. And that's exactly what the Pharisees were doing, but we do it too. It's a religion of self. See, I think I've got a pretty clear idea of what makes life good. And so I want to steer my own path in life because I feel like I know what makes me happy and what's going to make me happy. And so I'm tempted to listen to God when it seems agreeable and advantageous to me and to ignore him whenever it doesn't. And that's just a form of playing God. And yet Jesus says here in verse 7, the world hates me because I testify that its works are evil. So he says the works of the world are evil. So left to our own devices, we as a human race, we just tend to be drawn towards many of the wrong things. And Jesus warned us that if we try to live life on our own terms, that we are always going to inevitably go down the wrong path. And in saying that, some people hated him. And some people today still hate him for saying that. But it's a little more subtle than that too. It can be. Because even those of us who worship Jesus, like us who are here today to sing praises to his name, even those of us who would say, hey, I'm a Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus, sometimes we can be bent on doing what we want to do too. You know, right? Let's just be honest about it. Sometimes we too will ignore God when what he says to us doesn't suit us. Somebody put it succinctly in an addiction recovery blog that I read. They said this. They said, so one way I am playing God is when my worldview always places me at the center of things, and my expectation of life is that I should only have to do what I want to do and never have to do what I don't want to do. By the way, parents, if that's how you're raising your children in the name of gentle parenting, then get ready for them to play God for the rest of their lives. That's what you're setting them up for. If I am self-willed, if I am me-centered, I am definitely playing God. Whereas Jesus says in verse 17, he says, anyone who chooses to what? To do the will of God. And so anyone who chooses not to do what they want, but chooses instead to do the will of God, will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. So the way of Jesus is a conscious decision to say, no, I am going to give my will up and surrender it over to God's will. And if I will just trust Jesus enough to listen to him, to follow him, and let him lead me all the time in every area of my life, then I'm going to flourish. My life is going to flourish much, much greater than if I'm trying to carve out my own version of happiness by doing things on my own terms. And that's an important point for us to really kind of think about and consider. And this religion of self, it manifests itself in other ways too. Another way that it manifests itself is that I'm playing God when I want to be in control. Where are my fellow control people out there? I know you're out there. So when we want to be in control, we're really, that's another way of just playing God. And as this chapter opens, chapter 7 that we're looking at, Jesus' brothers at the beginning of the chapter are trying to control Jesus. Like they wanted to manipulate him and get him to either put up or shut up by pressuring him to go to Jerusalem to the big festival that was about to happen and put on a show. And Jesus, verse 6, Jesus told them, my time is not yet here. For you, any time will do. You go on to the festival. I am not going up to this festival because my time has not yet fully come. See, Jesus would not be controlled by anybody else's agenda. He was living his life according to the Father's will, according to the Father's agenda and the Father's timeline, and he completely trusted that. He knew that that was the best place that he could be. So I just think to myself, wow, what if we could learn to do the same? What if you and me, what if we could learn to trust God's agenda and timetable instead of trying to force our own? See, the Pharisees, they also tried desperately to control the narrative of what was happening around them. If you go on down to verse 30 in the chapter, it says, at this, they tried to seize him. They tried to seize Jesus because he was doing these things that were upsetting them. But no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. Still, many in the crowd believed in him. They said, when the Messiah comes, will he perform more signs than this man? The Pharisees heard the crowd whispering such things about him. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees sent temple guards to arrest him. All right, so you see the Pharisees here, and you can see their attempts to control the narrative and control the situation. They're doing everything they can to get rid of him. They want Jesus gone, and they're going to do everything in their power to accomplish that. But they can't. They can't. No matter what they try, they can't do it because it wasn't his time. It wasn't what God purposed, and it wasn't going to happen until the way that God wanted it to happen and the time that God wanted it to happen and for the purpose that God wanted it to happen. So this is something that I think we really need to think about, because I know that I used to imagine that I had full control of my life. I mean, I did. I thought I could attain all of my goals. I could solve all of my problems. I could make it happen if I could just give it enough effort and do everything right. Anybody else kind of think that way? And I eventually figured out that that's a fantasy. And the longer you live in that fantasy, the more stressed out and the more frustrated you're going to be. Because while there's nothing wrong with pursuing our dreams, and it's good to have dreams, and it's good to chase those dreams, we often don't leave room, though, for the possibility that God may have other plans that maybe we haven't even thought about. In fact, I was having a conversation with a lady just before church today about something just like that in her life. See, the difference between chasing your dreams and playing God is how tightly you cling to those dreams. So you need to hold on tightly enough to be able to push through the challenges that inevitably come to anything that's worthwhile in this life. But you also need to hold on loosely enough to give God permission to change your plans and to redirect you to his plans, which may not look anything like what you envisioned. And it's not just that we want to control our own lives, we also want to control other people's lives, don't we? Those of us who know God, those of us who serve God are especially tempted to kind of view ourselves as God's anointed spokesperson in various people's lives. We think it's our job to come in and speak for God to them. And we may try to control what other people do and what other people say because we believe we know what's best for them. I'm really preaching to myself today. And, as a parent, you want to do this with your kids, right? I mean, you try as a parent to control your kids and to get them to do what you want them to do and to behave and to have the attitude you want them to have. And, you try so hard, but eventually they grow up, and you realize, okay, they actually have a will of their own and they have the freedom to choose, and you can't choose for them. But oh, how we try. Right? Some of us don't stop with our kids. Some of us try to control our spouse. Some of us try to control our siblings. Some of us try to control even people that we don't know. We'll get on social media and try to control people. It's funny how, I was speaking about myself, sweetheart, not you. Okay. All right. And so, I see lots of elbowing happening up there in the room, getting our exercise in this morning. But anytime we try to go into control mode, okay, whether we're trying to control our own lives or especially when we're trying to control somebody else, we've slipped into playing God. And again, this can be subtle because I bet everybody in this room, if I were to ask you, who's in control? Who do you believe is ultimately in control? You would probably all say, yeah, God. God's in control. But when God doesn't necessarily do what you want him to do, how you want it done, as quickly as you want it done, you, like me, may find yourself trying to help him out and trying to kind of get in there and interject yourself into the situation and take things into your own hands. So I think that's a form of playing God. I think the whole name it and claim it prayer strategy can sometimes degrade into a religious form of playing God, where we're trying to manipulate him and control him through our prayers. Or here's a big one. What about when you don't pray at all over the challenges in your life because you feel like you would better spend your time trying to solve the problem yourself? That's a big one. See, all this effort to control the things that are happening in our lives and the people in our lives, it's not only an exercise in futility, it is also just not good for us because we aren't in control. Because God really is in control, and the sooner we figure that out, the better off we're going to be. Now, we have some control. We have some control over how we go through the process, but we can't control the results. And so when we're trying to control things like the Pharisees, we may end up actually getting in the way of what God is trying to do, what he is actually trying to accomplish. So life works so much better when we're working with God instead of working against God. But to do that, we have to remember who's in control. So what if we responded differently? What if, let's say, whenever we notice the compulsion to control starting to rise up in our soul, what if we decided that instead right then we were just going to stop and pray and say, God, you're driving, I'm just along for the ride. How much more peace might we have? Now, let me clarify that losing my need to control and to play God doesn't mean taking a passive approach to life. It doesn't mean that I have nothing to do or have no part in anything. God has made me in his image, and he's made you in his image, which means that he has given us a certain degree of power that we can use either for good or evil. So let's use the power we have to do as much good as we can. But it's a very different posture when we're trusting God with the results and we're leaving it in his hands. I still believe. I heard it ring. That's good. That's a good sign. I'm not as old as I thought I was. But, you know, along with thinking that sometimes I have more power than I actually do, I also sometimes think that I have more knowledge than I sometimes do. Okay, so let's think about that for a minute. John chapter 7, verse 21. Jesus says to the Pharisees, I did one miracle and you're all amazed, yet because Moses gave you circumcision, you circumcise a boy on the Sabbath. Now, if a boy can be circumcised on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. And this is such an interesting scenario here because they were so certain of their interpretations of God's law. They were so certain of their understanding of the Sabbath law. There was no doubt in their minds that it was wrong of Jesus to heal someone, even by divine power, on the Sabbath day. So they rejected him, thinking that if he was really from God, he would never do such a thing. There was only one flaw in their thinking. They were wrong. They had missed the point of the Sabbath law completely, which was all about helping people to find wholeness and well-being through rest and through connecting with God. And so healing a man whose body had been crippled by paralysis for 38 years was exactly the right kind of thing to do on the Sabbath day. And then when the temple guards, who the Pharisees sent to arrest Jesus, when they came back empty-handed, they explained that they had never heard a man speak so impressively. In verse 47, "You mean he has deceived you also?" the Pharisees retorted. "Have any of the rulers or the Pharisees believed in him? No, but this mob that what? Knows nothing," right? These people they know nothing. Nothing of the law. There's a curse on them. I mean, that's some pride right there. That's some prideful certainty on their part about their perfect knowledge of God's agenda that actually caused them to miss God when he was standing right in front of them. He was doing amazing things. He was doing miracles right in front of them, and they missed it. They couldn't appreciate it because it didn't fit into their little box of rigid expectations. See, I'm playing God when I overestimate my understanding of things. See, anytime we imagine that we know the way things should go, whether it's in the world out there at large or it's in our own lives, we are walking a thin line. We may sometimes even make demands of God. Like, this is what you've got to do. And if he doesn't do it, then we reject him. We get angry at God. And sometimes we even walk away from him. How can we expect to see the big picture that he sees? How can we expect to know how all of the pieces of his grand purposes fit together? See, he sees what we can't see. He knows what we can't know. And so much weight is lifted off our shoulders when we finally realize that it's so much better to let God be God and realize that we don't know what will serve the greatest good, but he does. And trusting him with it. See, not only is it arrogant to play God, but as I said earlier, when we're playing God, we miss the wonder of the true God. See, and God doesn't want you to miss him. He doesn't want you to miss a thing that he's doing in your life. In the middle of this strained interaction, Jesus says to the Pharisees in verse 33 and 34, Jesus said, "I'm with you for only a short time. And then I'm going back to the one who sent me. You will look for me, but what? You will not find me. And where I am, you cannot come." To me, that's heartbreaking. That's one of the saddest statements in all of the Bible. God was present. He was at work all around them, even in dramatic, miraculous ways, and they couldn't see him. They couldn't recognize him. He was right there, but he wasn't doing things on their terms. He wasn't doing the things they thought he should be doing to the people they thought he should be doing them for, at the times they thought he should be doing them. In other words, God wasn't following their playbook, and so they couldn't accept him. They couldn't accept that. And not only did they miss him, they turned on him. So when we are trying to live life on our own terms, when we are trying to be in control, when we are convinced that we know how everything should be and how everything should go, then we become blind to God's presence and to God's work all around us. think about this. What if God pressed against your life this week and you didn't even realize it? What if God's fingerprints and God's footprints are all around you and you're just not even seeing them? You're missing them. See, what could be worse, really, than that? What could be worse than the fact that there is a God who is amazingly wise and good and who loves you with such passion and who has the key to your destiny in his hands, and you missed him? What could be worse than that? It's hard to see the true God when we're busy playing God. My own spiritual journey has left me convinced of several attributes of God that are helping me to see that I am in much better hands when I let God take the steering wheel of the world and my life. One of those attributes would be that God is love. God is love, and that means that he wants what is best. Not only does he want what is best for me, he wants what's best for everybody around me. Sometimes I don't even want what's best for me, much less everybody else around me. I just want what's easiest. Second thing about God is that he knows all. And that means not only does he want what is best, he always knows what's best. Always. I don't. I'm often wrong. His strategies are always right on point. A third thing about God is that he has all power, which means not only does he want what is best, not only does he know what is best, but he has the power to make sure that it actually happens. He has the power to bring it about, to bring it into reality, and to prop me up in the middle of this adventure that he has called me into. And then a fourth thing about God is that he's always present. Always present. Which means that I don't have to hover over every situation and every person I care about. In fact, often it's best for everybody when I just step back and actually give God and other people space to work. God is present even when I am not. So, I don't need to play God. In fact, I make a puny God. The true God is so much better at his job than I am. And if I want to come alive in him, if I want to receive his peace, then I need to make sure that he stays on the throne of my heart. So the next step is to spend some time contemplating and praying today and throughout this week about where you might need to quit playing God in your own life. Where have you been trying to play God? If you've been trying to live life on your own terms, trying to carve out happiness your way, then try laying down your will and taking his on instead. Try surrendering your will to his. If you've been trying to control the circumstances of your own life, the people around you, trying to control everything and everyone, or anything and anyone, try letting go of that burden. Try letting God do what he wants to do in that situation, or in that person's life, in that person's heart, maybe in your own. And if you realize that you've been overestimating your understanding of things, I think a lot of us have been probably doing that through this election season, demanding that things go a certain way, convinced that we can't possibly be wrong, then take comfort in knowing that the only thing you really need to know is that God knows. And that he's got it. And he's got you. Let's pray. Father, right in this moment, we just need to recognize your greatness, how awesome you are, how you are infinitely more than we can ever begin to grasp, so that we can just humbly slip off the throne that we've been sitting on and let you take your place. Because God, you are the King. You are the true God. And we don't want to miss you because we're busy trying to play God. We want to see the wonder of who you are, what you're doing, what you're about. Because we know that you're working now. You're working right here among us. You're working in our homes, even when we can't see it, even when it doesn't look like it, even when it's just chaos, even when it just seems like everything is a mess. God, you are at work. So let us just have the humility, Lord. Give us the conviction in our hearts that we will receive your peace and receive you and see the good things you do as we are willing to open our hands and let you take the things that we're trying to control. God, we give them now. Turn them over to you. Just lay them down at the foot of the cross, because we know that a God who's able to figure out the solution to the salvation of the world, surely you're able to figure out everything else that we need you to straighten out in our world and in our lives. So we lay it at your foot. Thank you, Jesus, for being the King of all kings, the Lord of all lords, the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. We bow our hearts to your heart, to your will. In your name we pray.